All right, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Ahnaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. On our last episode, we discussed the growing threat of Islamism in the UK. On today's episode, likewise, Islamism is also casting an increasingly dark shadow over Canada. It is dividing communities, it's threatening national unity, and it is manifesting in universities, hosting extremists and radical groups, and it is online, on campuses, it fuels anti-Semitism, it radicalizes the youth of Canada, and it's undermining Canadian values as a whole. The question now is simple. How far will it spread, and what must be done to stop it? Joining us today is Raheel Raza, who is a prominent journalist, author, public speaker, media consultant, and interfaith discussion leader. She is the author of Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, A Muslim Canadian Woman Speaks Out, and she is an honorary associate of the National Secular Society. As always, we invite all of you to ask your questions during this discussion, which you can do by using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will try our best to answer as many of them as we can. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Raheel Raza. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anaf. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by defining the term Islamism. Islamism, or political Islam, is the idea that Islam is the solution to everything, that the religion dictates how everything in society, politics, the economy, and more should be run, and where Islamist rule must be imposed on others. Terrorism, violence, extremism, and religious fanaticism gone wild are products of this ideological messaging that is propagated over time, whether overtly or through more subtle means. Now, the greatest victims of Islamist ideology are Muslims themselves. The agenda of the Islamists is largely directed by the 50-point manifesto written by the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, in 1936. His proposals for reform are very specific and directed to the West, whom he calls infidels, touching all fields of human activity: political, judicial, administrative, social, educational, and economic. And his advice to his followers was simple: the West is evil, it needs to be destroyed from within, so travel to the West, integrate, and infiltrate from the inside. To the question about if the Islamist agenda has been successfully achieved in Canada, I would say yes, for sure. Despite warnings from Muslims and non-Muslims concerned about the future of our country, the Islamists have been successful in implementing their agenda and achieving their goals. Let's take a quick look at what was happening in the ground immediately after 9/11. In the late 1990s, Islamist groups in Canada were identified as several Sunni Islamist extremist groups, including Hamas and others, with ties to Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Lebanon, and Iran. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are believed to raise money in Canada. In 1998, Ward Elcock, the then director of Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, testified before a Canadian Senate Special Committee that there were more international terrorist organizations active in Canada than anywhere else in the world. He said that the counterterrorism branch of CSIS was investigating over 50 organizations and about 350 individuals. In 2006, 17 Muslims, including 5 juveniles, were arrested in Canada for planning a major terrorist attack on Canadian soil, which involves the storming of Canada's parliament and beheading of Prime Minister Stephen Harper. 2009 was a bumper year for Canadian terrorism issues. That year, Momin Khwaja was the first Canadian to be convicted under Canada's Federal Anti-Terrorism Act. He was charged with financing and facilitating terrorism and building a remote control device that could trigger bombs. That year, the supremacist group Hizb ut-Tahrir, banned in many countries, held a public conference in Mississauga, Ontario. Our efforts to alert media to this confident public display of radicalism were met with responses to the effect that there could be nothing done to report unless there was actual violence. So we attended undercover, and we concluded that Hizb ut-Tahrir's opposition to violence was tactical and temporary. That is, the group is sympathetic to jihadist ideology and works to create a politically charged atmosphere conducive to terrorism. Hizb ut-Tahrir representatives at that meeting clearly stated that it's incumbent on all Muslims to implement Sharia where they live and have a caliph. Fortunately, their recent conference in Ontario was cancelled after much lobbying. Apart from these, several other terrorist groups or entities with troubling tendencies have a presence in Canada. Among them is Al-Qaeda, who is banned in Canada, but has affiliated persons inside the country. There's Ansar al-Islam. This is reported to have the greatest degree of training in producing chemical and biological weaponry. Two of the group's leaders are Canadian and have lived in Toronto. The Armed Islamic Group, GIA. This group has been banned by the Canadian government. It has supporters throughout the Algerian expatriate community, including inside Canada. The Salafist Group for Call and Combat, another group arising out of North African members. They have been active in Canada, although the group is banned here. The most dangerous of them all is the Muslim Brotherhood. A Muslim organization in Canada has actually declared on its website that it aims at applying Islam as understood in its contemporary context by the late Imam Hassan al-Banna, that is the Muslim Brotherhood founder. So, following their agenda to a T, the Islamists have infiltrated our educational institutions, and this was fully exposed after October 7th, after the October 7th terrorist attack by Hamas on Israeli civilians. Anti-Semitic incidents are up by over 211%. Homes, businesses, schools, places of worship, neighborhoods, and institutions have all been targeted in an unparalleled spike in hate. The advent of campus radicalization and foreign funding is a great concern that has not been directly or at least adequately addressed by Canadian policymakers and government officials. Some Canadian universities have started establishing chairs in Islamic studies through financing from Arab sources. When the University of Western Ontario's affiliated Huron University College, an Anglican institution, established such a chair in its theology faculty, some alumni protested, and when it was discovered that the Muslim Brotherhood-oriented Muslim Association of Canada and the troubling Virginia-based International Institute of Islamic Thought would provide most of the $2 million funding for the new chair. Dr. Ingrid Mattson, former head of the Islamic Society of North America, a U.S. organization that was designated by Washington as unindicted co-conspirator in a history-making terror funding prosecution, was appointed chair of Huron's Islamic Studies Department. Mattson and other radical interests have been able to parlay the ostensible respectability of such appointments into opportunities to gain access to elite circles. At Carleton University in Ottawa, the Carleton Center for Study of Islam hosted an event for Tariq Ramadan, a personality of the Iranian government's press TV, who is reputed to be a leading Muslim Brotherhood front person. Furthermore, the Toronto District School Board has voted to incorporate the concept of anti-Palestinian racism, known as APR, within its broader anti-discrimination strategy, which has the potential to shut down any avenue for debate and discussion within the education system. Introducing a very specific term like APR is unnecessarily divisive and a distraction from more evidence-based racial inequities experienced by minority groups in Canadian society, and it dilutes the horrendous effect of the Hamas attack of October 7th. Promoting its inclusion in anti-discrimination policies could set some concerning precedents, especially when it comes to influencing young minds. The Islamist propaganda and hold on Canada is so strong and lethal that while Jewish speakers and films about October 7th are resisted with rallies and slogans and lobbies, pro-Hamas propaganda is freely allowed to take place on the streets and at educational institutions. The most recent nail in the coffin, so to speak, is the publication of the Canadian Guide to Combating and Understanding Islamophobia, published and funded by the federal government. This guide has already been distributed to government offices and school boards. The guide defines Islamophobia broadly as racism, stereotypes, prejudice, fear of acts of hostility directed towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general. This definition creates an intellectual sleight of hand, conflating prejudice against Muslims with criticism of certain doctrines or political movements under the banner of faith. Similarly, foreign funding for Islamic organizations and schools is a problem because funding, including from abroad, comes with vested subversive agendas. However, law and policy can be hard to change. According to Foreign Affairs and International Trade Canada, as technology improves and integrates trading and financial systems, terrorists' ability to collect and move funds between jurisdictions complicates the task of tracing and confiscating their assets. There are policies that allow Canada to freeze the assets of terrorist entities in Canada. However, Canada has been slow to implement anti-Islamist policies because of the greed for votes, political correctness, and woke culture. Politically, Canada is a mess. Almost every political party has been infiltrated by Islamists who push their agenda in subtle and sometimes very open ways. They are emboldened by the fact that there is no pushback. While at a rally in Calgary, this is the most recent, as Liberal leader Mark Carney was getting settled on stage, someone in the crowd who did not appear on camera shouted, and I quote, "Mr. Carney, there's a genocide in Palestine." And Carney replied, "I'm aware. That's why we have an arms embargo," before Liberal supporters drowned out the questioner by chanting the Liberal leader's name. As well, just this week, a member of parliament from Milton, Ontario, Adam Van Corverden, gave a talk at a mosque asking the audience to sign the Palestinian pledge and push Canadian lawmakers to promote Canada's goal, in quote, ending the genocide. He used the G word more than once. There's obviously no point in discussing only the problems if we can't talk about solutions. I am a die-hard, faithful Canadian, and the future of Canada, the future of my children and grandchildren is at stake. So I am very concerned about what's going on, along with like-minded people and organizations that we partner with. So we look at the solutions because we have obviously lost the battle, but we must win the war. Combating Islamism is like treating a virus. It's not just popping Tylenol because that will not do the trick. The virus needs to be surgically removed. The patient will often get worse before they get better, which gives us a sign of hope. But the treatment of any virus, of course, is rooted in hope. And similarly, anti-Islamism is animated by optimism in the capacity of our fellow humans, our fellow Canadians, our fellow North Americans to free themselves from the shackles of theocracy. The best examples of de-radicalization are those that have involved accountability within pertinent communities. For example, the Tamil and Sikh communities in Canada have managed to some extent to control extremism and terrorism within their ranks. A counter narrative is urgently needed to defeat the voices of those extremists and victim mongers who prey on Muslim youth before targeted youth become extremists. There are few, if any, think tanks in Canada looking at genuinely realistic ways or a long-term vision of the future of Canadian youth from a counter-radicalization perspective. Islamism is growing around the world, and Canada is no exception. Indeed, Canada is one of its most fertile ground. Canadians, both Muslim and non-Muslim, must educate themselves about exactly what Islamism is, how it differs from the faith of Islam, and the dangerous nature of Islamism. Regardless of where they come from, they need to treat this as a Canadian issue with human rights at the helm, and they need to form coalitions to work together with the help of lawfare. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was very insightful. And as we mentioned before we went live here, 15 minutes is really only enough to kind of scratch the surface on these things. So we will get into some questions here and hope to unpack that a bit further. Uh, you mentioned very briefly the policies of the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. How much do you feel that the anti-Islamist policies of Carney will vary from those of the previous Justin Trudeau administration?
Well, it's a wait and see game. When he makes remarks like the ones he does, think one begins to wonder. And so our problem is that we can't pinpoint any one solid leader who will take on this issue of anti-Islamist policies. You have to understand that there is a huge vote bank in the mosques. So leaders of all stripes, instead of coming to people like us, who are the voice of moderate Islam, they tend to go to the places which are actually part of the problem and not part of the solution. But then, this is all pandering to the masses, which is their vote bank. So we're waiting with bated breath. Mark Carney is more of a economic stabilizer with his background. But, he has a great reputation, so we hope he'll take this on. Pierre Poilievre is well aware of the issues of terrorism and radicalization. What action he takes, again, it's a waiting game.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Jay Lewis, who asks, why isn't the so-called silent majority of Muslims speaking out against Islamism, or are in fact the majority of Muslims in favor of Islamism?
Yes, it's a very good question. Thank you. This term silent majority has been thrown around. Let me assure you that while there is a silent minority, it is not the majority. We work with them through our organizations, and they don't speak out largely because of pressure from society and because they're afraid. And why are they afraid? I'll just tell you, because people like me who speak out are the proud recipients of fatwas, death threats, lawsuits, and a lot of hate mail. And not everybody is ready to take this on. It is a very unpopular game to be in. Speaking out is not the so-called Canadian way. And then added to it, we have political correctness, the woke culture, and the messages that are coming from the mosques. Although, according to a report in the Washington Post many years ago, only 20% of Muslims are mosque-going Muslims. The problem lies in the fact that our leadership, and I put the blame entirely on them, our leadership, our policymakers, haven't reached out to that silent minority. Because, they may be sitting on the fence. I mean, we do personally in our interaction with the community, but the leadership does not look at them. They look upon Muslims as a monolith. They don't understand that there are almost 60, we've come from almost 60 diverse countries, and Muslims are very diverse in their thinking, in their ethnicity. They haven't reached out to those who can make a difference.
Now, touching on something you mentioned there, uh, just like in the US and in Europe, it's very much the case that these Islamists are often emboldened to do what they do because these woke far leftists are holding the door open for them. It seems like this is also the case with Canadian Islamism. Is that a fair observation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They have been emboldened. I go back to right after 9/11. And to be very honest with you, that's when we understood that this was a huge problem, started writing and speaking about it, warning about it. And I still feel that that was a time the Western governments could have actually done something, especially USA and Canada. That time was right to take action because it was an ideology that they were fighting with. This is not a war where you take bombs and start bombing countries. That doesn't help the cause. It is an ideology, and it needed to be fought through a war of ideas. But of course, that didn't happen. And since then, Canada, like many other Western countries, especially what we see happening in Europe, has become now the festering ground for extremists and terrorists, not just Islamist extremists, but from other parts of the world as well, because they feel safe, they feel protected, and there hasn't been a harsh direct action against them.
Now, it's easier to see how in places like Europe or in the UK, Islamism can spread as quickly as it does, largely because of its closer proximity to South Asia and the Middle East, and with the huge amounts of immigration from those places. Canada is much further away geographically, and immigration, I imagine, is much less prominent. How then does Islamism continue to spread as quickly as it does?
Well, I will correct you there. Under our last prime minister, immigration was a hello, welcome, come in. We don't want to know who you are. We don't want to know what you do. Just come in and vote for me. So it was huge in the last 20 years. So, more so in the last 10 years. So, of course, with that, no vetting of people who are coming. Uh, these things go. Canada was the only country that was a safe haven for Islamists and terrorists. So they made it their haven, they made it their home. Uh, Added to that, you have the kind of immigrants who come and are still loyal to their masters back home, taking orders from them. And what is the kind of conversation that's taking place in their homes around their dining tables? I mean, I'm an immigrant. What the first thing we taught our children was loyalty to the country you live in, which, by the way, is an Islamic concept that, this is your home and you protect your home any way that you can. You don't harm it. But there are people, not all, of course, who physically are here, but their minds and affiliations and loyalty is to people back home. And so they bring those politics and they bring those extremist ideologies with them. And then, of course, it grows. It's passed on to their children.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like they're making the same mistake the European Union made about 10 years
Yes.
ago and have not learned the lessons
And
from.
I will tell you that 10 years ago, I went on an educational trip with the Middle East Forum to 3 European cities, and we saw what was happening. I came back and I wrote about it, and I said, we're only a few years away from becoming like Europe. Let's not do that. Let's make it, Canada, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Of course, I'm partial, was known as the peacemaker of the world. And there is a fine line between being nice and being stupid. And we veered towards, I take back the word stupid, I suppose it's politically incorrect, but ignorant. And, we veered towards this idea, this deflection that nothing can happen here. So what are we doing? We waited for these terrorist attacks to take place. And then all of a sudden it was a wake up call, but it was too late because, there's so many more cells, there's so many more people. And with this woke culture and now this Islamophobia study that has been created, people are scared to speak out for fear of being called racist or bigots. So for the Islamist problem, it leaves us as Muslims to speak out, although ironically, I have also been labeled an Islamophobe, but the fact is that we have to speak out unless we unless we identify the problem. We can't do anything about it. Our mandate in our organization is the three E's: to educate the masses, and to first of all expose the problem, educate the masses, and then empower for change from within. But the education is not happening.
I completely agree, and I hope that the good Canadians up north can make some steps towards that end. Now, I'm going to a question here from Delphine Milbrand, who asks, do you know who was behind the weekly marches in downtown Toronto?
Of course, Iran. Fully funded by Iran. They don't get to do those without a lot of funding. So, Iran is the head of the snake, so to speak. And as far as Hamas is concerned, these were not pro-Palestinian rallies because I went to them. They were actually pro-Hamas rallies. And, this obviously they're funded. The IRGC has a very strong presence in, I forgot to mention that in my notes of who the people are. They have a very strong presence in Canada and they get a lot of funding. So when I was talking about foreign funding, the first thing that needs to be stopped is foreign fundings to organizations and these groups. But yes, Iran has very lavishly funded these rallies, also in educational institutions. I'll tell you something very ironic. At the University of Toronto, they had these camps set up for a long time. And every day there were rallies. So our organization decided to make a gesture of peace. So we took a truck, put a peace message on it from a Muslim, and decided to take it there. They wouldn't allow us in. The lawmakers who were there wouldn't allow us in. So here you have these noisy, very, very reckless students there camping for 3 weeks, and they wouldn't allow a message of peace. So it just tells you that we're at a loss.
That's just absurd. But
Yeah, everything is absurd.
yeah, we are where we are.
Yes.
Now I'll ask a question here. I apologize if I mispronounce your surname. From Thomas Consitis. Within Canada, is there a concentration of Islamic communities such as Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto? Or do they settle across the country, like the western part, middle part, etc.?
Across the country. Of course, when immigration first started and when they flooded in the 1990s, their choice was always the larger cities because of jobs. But according to the subversive agenda of the Islamists, they come in and then they spread out into smaller areas. And we get news of really troubling activities like them connecting with the native communities, where they find easy targets because of the anger and the victimhood of the native communities and their youth. And so they have such devious and subversive ways of spreading their message that it is impossible for an ordinary person to get their mind around it unless you know the thinking of the Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood, and you read their manifesto, it's clear as daylight. Infiltrate in places of power. And they have. They have infiltrated every corridor of power.
Well, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more, and maybe we can wrap this up with this one here. It comes from an anonymous attendee who asks, So, is this a battle we can ever win?
Difficult question. Yes, I'm an eternal optimist. I'll tell you honestly, I've been doing this work for 30 years. I wouldn't have done it if we thought we couldn't win. We can, but it needs everyone. This is not a Muslim problem. Just like I say, anti Semitism is not a Jewish problem. This is a global virus. It's happening in the entire Western world. We need to form coalitions, regardless of our politics. We need to come together because this is going to only work if we at the grassroots can stand up and pressure our policymakers, our leaders, our politicians to actually implement the laws. Amount of time we have spent with the police chief and other people telling them exactly this. And it's not their fault because they have difficulty understanding the workings and the dynamics of the Islamists. So come to us and we'll tell you we've been dealing with this for 30 years. And once we come together, put aside our differences of any kind, learn from each other, help each other. Yes, we can. We still have, I think, a short frame of time before it's too late. And so I will always be optimistic because I wouldn't sleep at night if I didn't know I was doing something every day to make a difference. Whatever your passion is, write, speak out, lobby, just make sure that our voices are heard.
Well, thank you very much. Your optimism is truly inspiring. Now, for those of us in the audience and among our viewers who would like to follow more of your work and follow your mission, is there somewhere where you can direct them to find more of your work?
My website is www.raheelraza.com. And most of my writings and my books are on that. If you read my first book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, which was written after the London attacks, it seems like I'm saying I told you so, because all of that is still happening. So, yes, you can go there. You can email me directly. I'm happy to answer questions and, look me up on the internet. It'll take
Fantastic.
2 days.
Well, that is fantastic. Thank you very much. I will be sure if you are watching this in the future on the YouTube video, I will put those links in the video description below. Raheel, thank you again for taking the time. That was a fantastic expose, and invite our audience to go check out your website.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.
Of course,
Have a
it's
good
our
day,
pleasure.
everyone.
Now, for our viewers and listeners, if you have not done so already, please visit the Middle East Forum's YouTube channel and press the subscribe button so you can follow our podcast series and watch this and over 400 of our past podcast episodes. We thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.